Hey, John from StillWorks here. I've got a healthy list of home projects on the docket, both to increase beauty and efficiency. We're going to start by adding some flair above the bathtub and do a cedar slat wall.
Any good woodworking project starts by swinging around the old tape measure. And like anything that interacts with drywall, it's not square. Close to 6.5 near the top of the window and 6 at the bottom. That's okay though, I can work around that. With measurements precariously perched at the edge of my short-term memory, I'll start with the track saw to shave off a few pounds from a 1/2-inch sheet of plywood so I can more easily cut some strips at the table saw. A couple more long strips and I can bring the horizontal sections to length at the miter saw. Since I'll have to flip one end for end to cut all the way through, I'll use my removable stop block. You can find that in part 3 of my miter saw station build if you're interested. With all those pieces at final dimension, I'll roughly lay out where the slats and the negative spaces will be. I'm doing this so I know where to put some blue tape before painting. That way I can maintain a bare wood to bare wood connection for the eventual glue up. With that figured, I'll apply the tape.
Okay, minor design problem. If you consider all these pieces of blue tape as the slats themselves, we start right at the very end of the wall and even spacing all the way until we get to the end where I would need let's say about half as thick of a slat running all the way up. I think that's going to look stupid being on the end, so what I'm going to do is take that thin slat and put it right up the middle. I think it'll add a cool little design touch. So peel some blue tape and reapply.
After remathing and remasking everything, you can see the thin strip up the middle now. I'm going with matte black for the spaces between the slats, which should help them look more popped out in 3D. And to make the window appear floating within the slat wall, I'll hit the inside of the frame with that same matte black. Now I can turn my attention to this bundle of 4/4 cedar for the slats. I'll do some examining to pick the straightest boards for the longest pieces and jankiest for the shorter sections, and cut them about 3 inches long before the milling process. This does two things: saves the joiner, planer, and table saw from doing so much work, and that extra 3 inches means I can nip off any snipe that I get from the joiner or planer. Each piece will get a pair of perpendicular edges at the joiner, and the broad face made parallel at the planer. You know the drill. When working with a large number of pieces at the planer, set up some type of table nearby, but out of your walking lane, and have a stacking system in place for planed versus non-planed to avoid confusion. At the table saw, I'll finish up dimensioning on all 66 pieces. A note when making long rip cuts, sometimes a piece will release internal tension after the cut. This is okay here as the cedar is soft and I think I can force it into place with glue and screws. Next I'll go into autopilot for a while and sand 3 of the faces on each piece. To give the slat some pizzazz, I'll trim one end close to the edge at 30 degrees. I personally would rather turn the workpiece and use the miter function on the chop saw than leave it sitting flat and use the bevel function. But if you like leaning over at 30 degrees when you make a cut, go for it. The bevel on the other side will bring each piece to final length, and I'll use a stop clamped to my fence to make those repeatable. If you have kids, you know, if anything has a hint of climbability, so it will. Therefore, I'll break the edges on all 660 visible faces with 220 sandpaper. All of the pieces laid out, I'll blow off the dust and painstakingly apply water-based poly to each one. Once dry, I can start to marry them to the backer plywood with a thin bead of glue, and then working from one side, I'll clamp, pre-drill, and screw, then adjust the fit with the next clamp and keep moving down the line like that. For the subsequent slats, I'll use a couple spacer pieces that I checked for being exactly 1/2 inch. Time for this crooked fella. On this one I screwed both ends and then used some sideways clamping pressure to bring it in line, then squeezed it down to put in screws. The vertical pieces were so thin that I was fine eyeballing the screw locations from the bottom, but each horizontal piece has 30 slats, so I'll mark their location before moving forward. I just repeatedly moved the spacer, clamped, and screwed them in. This took a few hours, then it was time to install. I held each piece in place and drilled small locator holes through the space between the slats, which gave me a spot to install some anchors. I highly recommend these metal wall anchors rather than them plastic shits. The plastic ones bend and break when you hammer them in, and they need to be eliminated from the planet. And I know you have some, because you keep them when they come in a kit and you don't use them. So gather them up, find the sweatiest trash can you've got, and give them a full 1999 shack in there, and never look back. Anyway, I put in the metal anchors, widened the holes on the plywood, and then screwed them in place. Last step is to paint the screw heads black, and we're all done here. Say, are you really a woodworker? Find out here. Thanks for watching.